Hello, everyone. I just wanted to supplement the chapter on Thomas Aquinas and natural law theory with just a few remarks, which I think might help. The I suppose the general title of this sort of way of thinking about morality, this theory of morality, or this approach to ethics, is natural law theory. So the so the central concept here is just law in general, and I think that we have encountered this before in Kant, but in a different way. If you look at the first two categorical imperatives, especially the first one, essentially Kant thinks that we have a duty to obey the moral law. But what does Kant mean by the moral law? The first categorical imperative says that we have a duty to lawfulness in general. Sorry if I misspelled that, have I? Yeah. Or we have a duty to be lawful. That's what I think is the basic meaning of the first categorical imperative. Kant does not fill in what he doesn't fill in what any moral law might be. That's up to your judgment. That is, when you're applying the first categorical imperative and you're asking whether your maxim of action can serve as a law for everyone, basically what you're asking is, do I accept this as something that could stand as a moral law? And you have to use your own judgment. You have to fill in the content, basically. Aquinas's notion Aquinas's idea of law is different. Let's just say that it is different. Um, for Aquinas, some laws, and let's call them imperatives, do this or don't do that, or maxims, are seen by we rational creatures, because we have reason, as immediately true and binding on us. That is, and here I'm talking about natural law. The most famous, the most basic, Thomas says, something like that. Not the God, the good. The good should be done and evil avoided is the most basic, fundamental, taken for granted, obviously true moral law. And it is, again, it's seen by us, Thomas would say, is immediately true, or immediately seen by us as true. That it's self-evident. Is the key term here. It's a self-evident moral truth that the good, whatever it is, should be done, should be accomplished, and evil, whatever that is, should be avoided, should be shunned, should be prevented if possible. And the idea is that this is a self evident moral truth, or you might even say a self evident moral imperative if we put it in the form of imperative. You might say that this is the fundamental rule of human life, of any form, possible form or imaginable form of life, that we should always do that which we shall always do that which is good and avoid that which is evil, or the good should be done and evil avoided. This, though, of course, I mean, I think it's true, actually, that it's a self-evident truth, or we take it at least as self-evident. But it raises some immediate questions, and the most fundamental is, what is the good? That is, we will probably all say that the fundamental principle, or the first precept, he would call it, of the natural law, and therefore of all morality, is the good should be done and evil avoided. But that begs the question, and that is, it assumes that we know what the good is, and we certainly don't. What is the good? In any particular situation, I may follow this this precept to do what is good and avoid what is evil. I may try to follow it, but I have to make more particular, concrete judgments. I have to be able to identify what the good is, essentially. So there's a problem. And it's a problem to which he has an answer. And in the text, in Ethics for A level, they talk about fundamental, I'm sorry, what do they call them? I'm sorry, I have to look. Um, they call them primary precepts: protect and preserve human life, reproduce and educate one's offspring, know and worship God, live in a society. That's all good. These are the primary precepts, and they are answers in a certain way to the question, what is the good? But why? Right? If you look at Thomas's actual text on this crucial issue, he gives you a kind of an answer like, um, we have natural inclinations as human beings, and it's crucial that we see this. It's a rather crude way of putting it. Seen in a religious way, that is, seeing human beings as created beings. Our inclinations are not accidental. That is, our basic nature is a result of what God meant us to be. And it is a guide to how we should live. It is one of the fundamental advantages of having a religious view of human nature, that it allows us to interpret the fundamentals of human nature as being meaningful in a way, and as being an indication of what God meant for us and how he meant us to live. So if we look again at these, what do they call them, primary precepts: protect and preserve human life. Human beings have a natural inclination to protect their own lives. And this is not something that we have to learn. We have a natural inclination to protect our lives. And therefore, what that tells us is that human life is a good, our own and others. So that when we go back to the fundamental precept to do what the to do the good and avoid evil, we know that one of the goods is human life. So we can fill that in. Uh, Human life should be protected, and whatever is destructive to human life should be prevented and avoided. You see what he did there, right? So then, if we look at the second one, reproduce and educate one's offspring. Human beings have a natural inclination towards reproduction. It's called our sex drive. It's called our inclination to sex. What Thomas would say is that's an indication that children are good and the family is good and raising children is good. So we could then plug that in again to the fundamental principle, fundamental precept. The family should be protected and furthered, and anything destructive to the family and the education of children, let's say, should be avoided and prevented. So we've got something there. Right? Can fill it in for the other ones too. Know and worship God. I mean, human beings have a fundamental curiosity. They want to know. So knowledge is a good. And not just knowledge of God, although for any Christian thinker, ultimately the most important knowledge is knowledge of God. But all knowledge is good. But as we have a fundamental, pre-existing, natural inclination to discover the truth, to know. So what that indicates is that knowledge is a good, and especially knowledge of God, but all knowledge. Right? We have a fundamental, number 4, we have a fundamental inclination, desire to live amongst other human beings. So community or society is a good. So again, we can plug those in to the fundamental precept. Knowledge should be pursued and preserved, and ignorance avoided. The community, this society we live in, community, should be preserved and protected and furthered. Anything destructive to community should be avoided. You see how by looking at our natural inclinations as human beings, that we are given some sort of guide, not a complete guide, because obviously in any particular case things become more complicated. But we get a basic guide to what the good is. Right? And so that this fundamental precept turns out to be not useless at all, because we do have a method for determining what is actually good. And that is those things towards which we are naturally inclined. Things like family, things like community, things like knowledge.